Ladies and gentlemen, Lucy. Well, thank you very much for being part of the last lecture. We move on to our fourth lecture in the Packed to Ronnie's programme of today. And I introduce you to Cindy Waters, who is the architect for this fantastic building. Again, I'm not going to introduce her. Her bio is in the pack. So please do have a look at that. And I'm sure Cindy will be around the rest of the day if you want to talk to her. And yes, I am going to try and get the pavilion room open so people can go and have a look up there as well. So with no more ado, over to Cindy. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me today. We won a competition to design to design a building at Newnham and we started work in the beginning of 2015, so just about 10 years ago. We didn't win a competition to design this building. We won a competition to design a building on the tennis courts at the Whitstead Barton Road end of the site. And it's rather fortunate that we didn't go ahead with that, because the planners told us some years later that we would never have got planning permission for it. So we started off with a master plan for this site. We worked our way around every single room, opened every door, poked our head in every cupboard, worked out with the college what worked and what didn't, what had happened organically over time. Offices had become bedrooms, bedrooms had become offices. Most things worked rather well, but some things didn't. And we came to the conclusion through that very, very rigorous process that what we probably needed to do was spend the limited funds that the college had on something that would address the front door. And somebody, Frida was talking, somebody asked the question in Frida's talk about the backs and the fronts. And it was something that we spent quite a lot of time worrying about and thinking about. Was the Champneys buildings very beautifully turn inwards and address this magnificent garden. I think it's one of the most beautiful places on earth, possibly, the Newnham Gardens. But the backs, the way that colleges' buildings turn their backs to the street is, in some places, not that great. And we thought we'd try and keep that in our minds as we move forward through the design process. So quite quickly in this process of having won this competition for a building at the bottom end of the site, realized it probably wasn't going to be the best use of the college's funds. Coming to this part of the site, we then had the rather challenging problem to solve of what to do about Strachey. Sure, there are probably people in this room who were in Strachey as students. There were certainly people who had been students in Strachey when the conversation started about its possible demolition. The reality is that the college had commissioned a survey of the Strachey building, and because of its construction, because pipe work was embedded in walls, because the services were failing, the cost of fixing the building was going to be many, many, many millions of pounds. And it didn't really make any sense to try and fix it. Now that conversations moved on, I'm not sure that 10 years later, we would have been talking about taking it down. We might have still been, and there are buildings by the same architect being taken down in other colleges. But it was something that we concluded was the right thing to do, with some sadness, and we ended up with a free bit of site in which to work. We went to governing body about 3 months into the process, explained our thinking about why this was the right site for a new building, and what it could accommodate and what the benefit it would bring to the college. Luckily, the governing body went along with that. Many people who were at that meeting and were with us all the way through this project are in the room. And it was a sort of labor of love from then on. So I've spent we then spent a lot of time thinking about what should this building be. And we were right, the Champneys buildings straddle the end of the Victorian period, the beginning of the Edwardian period, and with arts and crafts very much at the arts and crafts movement very much at the heart of the philosophy. And Frida already read you some of that letter from Miss Merrifield from 1876, talking about how marvelous the garden. We quoted that from that letter because of her reference to the gardens and how delightful it was to be at Newnham, having obviously come from her home somewhere in the country and been very happy to be here. We had, not too long before we started working at Newnham, designed a building at Bedale School in Hampshire, right next to the marvelous Ernest Jimson Library that was built, Memorial Library that was built in 1915. So we had already been puzzling about the arts and crafts movement, how to create a contemporary building that embodied the philosophy of the arts and crafts movement, truth to materials, and the sort of honesty of what the architecture came to represent. So it was our starting point, was obviously the Champneys buildings. We also did a huge amount of consultation around in the college. We spoke to everyone about what this building should be. And at the time, a lot of people said, why are you doing this? What's this collaboration all about? You're just making a rod for your own back. Which in some cases was no doubt true. But we had 78 separate consultation events. We spoke to everybody, obviously students, fellows, potential donors, but the porters, the gardeners, about how this building could knit itself into this extraordinarily complex context. Champneys had created a set piece, and frankly, what had come later was, in some instances, a rather disappointment, and many of those buildings had gone by the time we got here. And students, this is some sketches we did summarizing the feedback we got from the consultation, all the usual things, where do you park your bike and where do the bins go? But how do you create? I was fascinated by the first floor plan of Old Hall, which I've seen before, but it was with 13 rooms, and we ended up landing on a model that was sort of 8 to 12 rooms, creating these family communal units where students could share a kitchen and cook together and eat together and live together and create that sense of community. And these were all the things, we made little sketches of all the things people said they wanted: a window with a view, a double bed, that was controversial, enough space to do their laundry, and a balcony with a view, and roof gardens, and all of the things that ended up in this building. People here in this college told us they wanted, and that's what they got. Of course, our starting point was the set piece, the marvelous buildings by Champneys, and we went to quite a lot of trouble to understand this legacy. The basic materials, the red brick and the bronze of the beautiful gates, and the timber that you see everywhere, the natural materials you see all over the college, the timber floors were our inspiration. But we weren't trying to do something. We weren't trying to deliver a building that was a pastiche of the Champneys buildings either. That would have been a real shame and not true to the arts and crafts ethos at all. But this very strong connection between inside and out, the huge importance of the gardens really was our starting point. When we first spoke to the planners, we had this sort of strange notion that we might not do a red brick building. They were very clear. We met with Historic England and the planners very early on, went to see the design and conservation panel of the Cambridge councils at Cambridge, the planning department. And they said, lovely, you can do anything you like, pretty much, as long as it's red brick. So we, that was that really. And then we came to, and then we had this real kind of battle about Strachey, and what to do with what to keep and what not to keep. It was very, very clear that the Elizabeth Scott Building is a fine building, and this image is fascinating. If you look at how the building grades from left to right, and then you saw that image that Frida showed in her talk about what was coming next. There was this marvelous, going from Sidgwick Hall to the central entranceway and then on, the detail changes. The building was getting more modern as it progressed, further, whichever way that is. Thank you. And then Strachey comes stepping forward into the space. And what you can't see in this photograph is that it then wrapped round and clipped onto the extension to the Pfeiffer building. We made a very early decision that we were going to obviously keep the Elizabeth Scott Building. There was no way that the college could afford to get rid of that building and didn't want to, and make use of that the entrance, which wasn't terribly well used before. But the back of the Elizabeth Scott Building, including the big tower, was really not very. It was quite poor accommodation. Some of the rooms were minute. It had always been the back. It had always been the back onto the car park, which I know Otto loves, but it was not the way that we thought one should enter Newnham. In fact, my very first job I ever did in Cambridge was for Norman Foster, and I was a very, very new graduate, and I worked on the law faculty library on the Sidgwick site, and I used to stand on the Sidgwick site and look across to the then quite new Rare Books Library by Van Henigen and Howard, and think, is that a Cambridge College? I mean, it just looks like a car park with a plant room, and that is what it looked like to me as a new graduate. So we started with this jigsaw puzzle, and we started figuring out what to do about how to stitch into this extraordinary context. And we had the very fine Rosalind Franklin building by Alice Morrison as one edge of the site, and Sidgwick Hall at the other. And we'd made the decision by this stage that Strachey was going to come down, and we had this really rather challenging problem of how to piece a building into the site and how to then address the street actually and make the facade of the building welcoming. I'm sorry, the image on the left isn't terribly clear, but you can see where you can see the tennis courts where we were going to build, and you can see the Strachey building that then came down. And what we ended up doing was remarkably similar to what Elizabeth Scott had proposed and as phase 2 of her vision for the college. And if you've spent any time working in Cambridge colleges, you'll know that there's always a phase 1 and a phase 2 and sometimes a phase 10, and they mostly don't get built. So this is quite rather nice that ours did end up being built. And what it did was create a new area of garden, which hopefully you have all enjoyed and will all enjoy later. And it was very important to us that we created both the new gardens between the Rosalind Franklin and building and the Dorothy Garrod Building, and this new area of garden that had the one leg, or whichever body part we want to call it, of the Strachey building, literally cutting diagonally across it previously, and making it quite a difficult space to use. So there we just have the original plan of the college as we found it, and the new plan. And our brief was to create ensuite student bedrooms, so the college could generate some income for conferences, a cafe. No particular idea of what the cafe should be, just a cafe, but it was always going to be open to the public, as the gardens are. A new entrance in Porter's Lodge, some conference facilities, which we're sitting in, some staff offices. The staff offices in the college were dotted all over the college, as they very often are, and we managed to sort of bring them together in one place. And then a gym. And when we first spoke to the students, the gym wasn't very nice before. And when we spoke to students, almost all of them said that they didn't like the gym. So we decided that we'd give them the best gym in Cambridge and put the gym on the roof. But it was also very important, there were very important things that underpinned this project from the start. The buildings had to reflect the ethos, values, and culture of Newnham, which all of you will know is very specific. warm, friendly, supportive, welcoming, domestic in style, which has already been mentioned today, which was very much very central to the Champneys philosophy, non-hierarchical, distinctive, memorable, etc. Built to last. I'll talk about this more in a moment, but 100-year life is actually, although we're in Cambridge and many buildings in Cambridge are very old, it's quite a difficult thing to achieve and with modern construction. But it was very important to us that we tried as hard as we could to achieve that. And flexibility and adaptability so that the building could flex and change in the future. People have asked me, what would you have liked to do better about this project? And I think we probably could have, had we had the budget, we probably could have made the building more sustainable. It's very sustainable in its design, but we probably could have added some more renewable energy, sources of renewable energy. There are some photovoltaic panels on the roof. We did look at ground source heat pump, and it was terribly expensive, and we couldn't afford to do that. So what did we really learn from Champneys? We went round and with a microscope and we looked at every single building. Almost every building has a different brick bond. All the language of terracotta and brick exists on all of the Champneys buildings. And we zoomed in on the detail, and we ended up taking a lot of that language, that detail, that articulation, and bringing it into a modern context, a modern building. The dog's tooth brick that you see on the outside of the building that is become emblematic of this building, and the perforated brick at the ground floor was a long conversation that we had with the building steering group. The two facades are very different. The facade on the left is the facades facing outward to the street that create large window seats with windows that open, and the facade on the right is the facades that face inwards into the courtyard. The walls are load bearing, so they were, many modern buildings are built as are not load bearing buildings, or older buildings are. That was something that was very important to us too. So we built a mock-up. We realized that we weren't actually 100% sure how to make this brick work. So we built a full-size mock-up and had this huge sample bay of brickwork out in the garden. And we used that to test how to make the brickwork, how to make it stand up, so that the contractors could figure out how to build it. Which bond to use, which color of mortar to have, which color of brick to go for. We worked with an amazing brick makers called Northcote, and they made us a particular blend of brick for this building. You'll see if you look at the extension to Fifer and you look at a few other buildings around the site, they are quite close in color to the Champneys buildings, which in themselves are not all the same color, but they somehow managed to stand out as sort of close but no cigar. And we were quite determined that this building was going to sit well. And having been told we had to have a red brick building, we were determined that we weren't going to make that mistake. And we also were quite interested to know how this perforated brick would work at night, and how this could become emblematic of this building. And you'll see the big panel of brickwork which is lit at night over the Porter's Lodge. So we spent the night here. We crawled around in the bushes. We put torches behind the brickwork, and we worked out that it had this rather beautiful poetic quality when lit at night. And we ended up working with Northcote. We have many brick specials, some of them taken lit quite directly from Champneys' own buildings. One you'll see around all of the windows. If you look at the building, you'll see a beautiful little brick special detail, which is a direct copy of the brick moldings on one of the Champneys buildings. We drew everything at a large scale, one to one in many cases, And we worked out this building. We worked every single detail around this building to brick module. So there were almost no cut bricks. We didn't quite managed with none, but and you'll see the image here on the bottom right, that this how it all comes together. This is facing Sidgwick Avenue. The you see the light behind the perforated brick at the lower level. You see the curtains drawn across to give a little bit of privacy into what is a supervision room. The brilliant thing about those about the perforated brick is you can just leave the windows open behind them, and people do, and there's no security issue, and you just get all the fresh air. You can also close them when you want quiet, and all the rooms that are along the Sidgwick Avenue frontage have got mechanical cooling, so you can switch that on if you need to. But and we also had long conversations about whether we should take the perforated brickwork all the way up, and we didn't. And that was a decision that was made at governing, went all the way to governing body level. And I generally do think it was the right thing to do. It has come to define the building, and I think it was typically collegiate way of making a decision, and we collectively made the right decision. So the image on the left is obviously the original Buckland and Hayward 1949 building with the Cohen gates in front. The end of Elizabeth Scott's building had sort of ended up with this water tower and a staircase tower, and sort of was meant to turn the corner and go back down through at 90 degrees, and that never happened. So we had this very long corridor, not quite the longest corridor in Europe, but a very long corridor that started at that pair of doors on the left and went all the way through to Peel, and was, was long. But also the way it went through Strachey was quite the way you then went off through Strachey or turned right and went all the way down through past the dining hall, past the hall, etc. But we didn't want to throw everything away, so we kept every bit of the Cohen gates and set them aside. They went into storage. The gates themselves were restored. When we put them back, all we did was change the brick we put all the stone and all the detail back, and you'll see them over there. When you look at the building from Sidgwick Avenue, and all we did was change the color of the brick to red, and we kept the stone surround of the doors because the extension to Pfeiffer was by the same architect, built in the same year, more or less, and we relocated the stone surround, and you'll see when you walk through the Porter's Lodge, you see the stone surround on the Pfeiffer extension. So we didn't want to throw it all away, but the rooms on the back of the Elizabeth Scott building were, I mean, Wendy Evans is in the room, she'll remember, you almost couldn't get into them, they were so small. They weren't even really big enough for a single bed. So those got sort of scraped away, and the Dorothy Garrod Building wraps around and clips onto the back. And the new entrance facade mirrors the trunk and canopy of the plane trees on Sidgwick Avenue. If you walk a little way into the Sidgwick site and look back, you'll see the perforated brickwork round about the same height as the trunks of the trees, and the upper part of the building round about the same as the canopies. And that was very deliberate. And we wanted this building to be perforate. We wanted people to be able to see in, and we wanted the Porter's Lodge to feel very welcoming, and not just to be a gateway into the inner sanctum beyond, but to be a place where people were welcomed into the building, where they could sit and wait for their friends, where you could turn left into the cafe, turn right to go down through to the rest of the college. So we shifted the center of gravity from the very far end of the site and to a little bit more central. There are very eminent people sitting in the room who'll probably tell me this happens in other colleges, and I'm sure it does, but we wanted this Newnham to be special. We wanted you to be able to see through from the street to the garden, to be welcome into this publicly accessible cafe, to be able to see through from the Porter's Lodge when you arrive in the Porter's Lodge to the gardens, to have this welcome and transparency. Newnham didn't want a 16th century gatehouse. And there you just see some of what I've been talking about, of how the building relates to the street, how you see in, and how it transforms at night. And then, we didn't know what this cafe was going to be. We didn't know what the brief should be exactly. We just knew that the college needed this social heart. And I come here frequently. I was here the other day, and it's always full. It's always, students are always in here working quietly. It gets used for all sorts of purposes. We had no idea whether it would work or not. But I'm always delighted when I come here and I have to fight to get a seat. And it's something that, you know, we are very proud of. And it's been what you see when you go into that space is, if you look up towards the back of the Elizabeth Scott Building, that's exactly where the new building joins to the old. And we, in the process, refurbished all the rooms in the Elizabeth Scott Building, and they form part of the overall project. And I love this quote. This is a quote from an undergraduate who was one of the first students to move into the building. She was partially sighted and going blind. She was in her room for her full 4 years here. And she talks beautifully about her room and having it, and how much it impacted on her. But she says, my favorite space is the cafe because it's such a hub in terms of social life. I've made a lot of my best friends at Newnham through sitting in the cafe, talking and studying. It ties people together and makes Newnham a community to a larger extent than I think it would have been before we had this lovely space. So that's something we set out to do, but you never know, you know, until people start to use a building, you never know if it's going to work. And I was also very, when Frida was talking about the domestic character of the original Champneys buildings and this idea of a home away from home. When we spent so much time talking about the bedrooms and the layout of bedrooms and how people would live in these kind of family units and be able to cook and eat together. And people who live in this and work in this building love it. They love the relationship to the gardens. They love the cafe. They love the Porter's Lodge. But they particularly love having their own kitchen table and being able to eat and cook and study together. That's you know, what students tell us, that's very important to them. So that's the garden at the back there that was designed by the marvelous Bradley Hull Schunach architects, that connects the Rosalind Franklin building to the Dorothy Garrod Building. And I'm particularly proud of the fact that the building won lots of awards, which is always lovely, but it won awards for craftsmanship, which was something that we particularly set out to achieve and did achieve. We had the most fantastic contractors on this project, called SDC. They're Bedford based actually, but they were wonderful to work with, and they you know, this project ended up being a labor of love for the college, for the whole design team, and particularly for the contractors. And this was when the Brick Awards, when we got got the top prize at the Brick Awards, the citation said, adopting the arts and crafts tenet of truth and materials, the contemporary hit in this detail in handmade brick complements but never mimics the Champneys buildings. And so that's what we tried to do, and hopefully we managed to achieve that. And I'll just finish on this slide, because one of the other conversations we had, and again, I think this is quite unique in Oxbridge colleges, was whether the education aspect of the college should be visible from the street. And these supervision rooms are, you know, you can draw the curtains if you want to, and people do, but they also don't. And you can see supervisions and teaching going on there, you know, pretty much all through the academic terms. So thank you very much for listening, and that's the end of my talk. Thank you.